now for our feature presentation.
An empty lot now marks the spot of one of the worst Chicago police scandals in history. Once the Ida B. Wells housing project, it was where a group of corrupt Chicago cops preyed almost risk-free on residents for most of a decade.
In 2006, you got arrested by Sergeant Ronald Watts, who was a corrupt Chicago police sergeant.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about what happened.
So I had came home. I was out in 06. I was doing my robberies. That's where it started at with Watts. I never knew who Watts was until then. My mom and them know who Watts is, everybody, because he from the low end too. He just a police officer who was getting his ass kicked in school. And then when he became a police officer, everybody who was doing shit to him and treating him in high school, he had a vengeance.
Right. He was also accused of extorting money from drug dealers.
That was him.
And what they said was, after that run-in you had with Watts, you became an FBI informant.
Yeah, that's true.
So how did that happen?
I walked into the police station, tried to tell them, like, this man taking people money and shit and all that. I don't regret it either, blood. I don't regret that shit either.
Okay, so your cooperation with the FBI led to his arrest?
Yeah.
For those that don't know, Martell Wiley, aka Snitches News, was raised in the Ida B. Wells housing complex, which also included the Madden homes and the Clarence Darrow homes, in an area of Chicago known as the Low End. Ronald Watts terrorized the residents of this community until he was brought down by two brave police officers and a dirty, smelly, confidential informant nicknamed Snitches News. Oops, I meant Chewbacca, and this is their crazy story. According to an article published by the Invisible Institute, on February 19, 2007, Anthony Abate, an off-duty officer, had been drinking heavily at a tavern on the northwest side. When the bartender, Carolina Obrica, refused to serve him more alcohol, he came behind the bar and punched and kicked her. Other customers intervened, and Abate left. Obrica called 911. She told the officers who responded that she had been attacked by a police officer, and the incident had been recorded by the bar's security camera. Neither of these statements was included in the police report. In the days that followed, other officers put pressure on Obrica and the bar owner not to file charges. When it became apparent that the Chicago Police Department was not going to take meaningful action against Abate, Obrica's attorney released the video recorded by the bar's security camera. The footage of the lumbering Abate, flailing away at the petite bartender, went viral. Felony charges quickly followed, and he was found guilty. Superintendent Philip Klein was forced to retire. He didn't help himself when he said, in an effort to convey the depths of his disapproval of Abate, "If I could hit him with a baseball bat, I would." Mayor Richard Daley began the search for a new superintendent, and an antidote to growing public concerns that his police department was out of control. That was the moment, in the spring of 2007, that Chicago police officers Shannon Spalding and Danny Echeverria went to the FBI to pass on evidence of a scandal more extensive and damaging than those dominating the headlines. A CPD sergeant named Ronald Watts was running an elaborate criminal enterprise within the department, extorting tax from drug dealers and targeting their rivals. Spalding and Echeverria went on their day off and took precautions to ensure that no one saw them enter the building. They were acutely aware that it was a cardinal sin to go outside the department to another agency, because, as Spalding put it, that means the bosses can't control the cover-up. They had hoped to meet with Ken Samuels, the FBI agent who had contacted Spalding years earlier, at the suggestion of Mickey Spahr-Garin, an officer who had previously been on Watts's team, but Samuels was not available. Instead, they met with Special Agent Patrick Smith. Contrary to their expectation, that they would have no further involvement with the FBI, once they passed on their information, Spalding and Echeverria found themselves in regular contact with Smith. He called frequently, and they occasionally met with him after work, or on their days off. During this period, Mayor Daley made two concurrent moves in response to demands for police reform. First, he appointed Jody Weiss superintendent. Not only was Weiss an outsider to the department, he had been a high-ranking official within the FBI, prompting speculation that his appointment was designed to head off federal intervention. Second, the CPD's Office of Professional Standards, which had long been criticized for failing to vigorously investigate citizen complaints, was rebranded the Independent Police Review Authority, and Daley installed a well-regarded police monitor from Los Angeles to run it. Whatever else might be said about these moves, they served to deflate the public debate about police accountability. the attention of the press soon moved elsewhere. As Weiss was entering into what would prove a difficult tenure as superintendent, Spaulding and Echeverria were becoming increasingly uneasy about their interactions with the FBI. Smith had begun to ask them to break away to do work for him on the clock, which they refused to do. After more than a year of intermittent contact with Smith, they felt the need to make sure they were working within department guidelines. In August 2008, they met with Tina Scahill, the chief of the CPD's Internal Affairs Division. Also present were Smith, Sergeant Tom Chester, of the Confidential Section of Internal Affairs, who served as a liaison to the FBI, and Lieutenant Barbara West, commanding officer within Internal Affairs. Spaulding was gratified by Scahill's response. She was wonderful. This is an important investigation, Spaulding recalled her telling them. It's been on our radar for a long time, but we haven't been able to accomplish anything. You two have the means to get results. Scahill told Spaulding and Echeverria they would be detailed to the FBI to work undercover on the investigation of Watts and his team. Spaulding expressed concerns about possible damage to their careers, were their identities revealed. Scahill assured them their identities would remain confidential. You will be protected, she said. Scahill emphasized the need for secrecy. Don't tell anybody, this goes higher than the blue shirts. They have access to your files, your home information. You're working with people who are criminals with badges. In her deposition, in Spaulding and Echeverria's lawsuit, Scahill confirms that this meeting took place, but her account is considerably less detailed and she repeatedly responds to questions by saying that she does not recall. According to Spaulding, the formal mechanism for assigning them to the FBI was to transfer them from the Organized Crime Bureau to Unit 543, Detached Services, a miscellaneous detail that would provide cover for their work on the Watts investigation. They were to report to Tom Chester. Only a handful of people within the department were to know of their assignment, among them, Deborah Kirby, General Counsel for the Superintendent. Scahill would report directly to Superintendent Weiss on the progress of the investigation. The joint FBI-IAD investigation was christened Operation Brass Tacks. When Spaulding and Echeverria were transferred to 543 and began reporting to the FBI, no explanation was given to the Organized Crime Bureau. Officers are often detailed to narcotic task forces at the FBI, Spaulding explained. So, if someone asked what they were working on, that was a sufficient response. Soon after they came to the FBI, Spaulding ran into Ken Samuels, the agent who had called her years earlier, to inquire about Watts. She asked him what had become of the case he was working on then, and was surprised to learn it was still open. She said Samuels expressed frustration. The case never went anywhere, he said. Whenever it started to go somewhere, it was like Watts was getting a heads up. We haven't been able to get inside. From the start, Spaulding and Echeverria encountered a good deal of interagency distrust. On the first day they reported to the FBI, Spaulding recalled, Special Agent Julie Anderson expressed surprise that Watts had become a sergeant. They promoted him? She said. What the fuck is wrong with CPD? Anderson was also openly suspicious of internal affairs. Your department will sabotage this investigation, she remarked. As soon as it gets to white shirts, they'll shut it down. For their part, the two street-smart narcotics cops quickly grew skeptical about the FBI's way of doing things. Among the first tasks they undertook was retranscribing dozens of CDs of wiretaps in the Watts case, having found transcripts marked, not pertinent, that contained highly relevant material. In one instance, Lou, for lieutenant, was mistaken for a first name. In another, Obama was mistaken for the President of the United States, when in fact it was a reference to the dope line at the Ida B. Wells homes, operated by a drug dealer named Kamain, Insane Fears. His crew wore Obama t-shirts, Yes We Can, as a form of marketing, rather than an expression of political allegiance. When challenged by the police, what's with the shirts? They would respond that they were supporting the black presidential candidate from the south side of Chicago. On December 12, 2008, a few months after Spaulding and Echeverria were formally assigned to the FBI, Fears was shot down at 37th and Calumet. The shooter or shooters pumped 17 rounds into his body. As in the case of Big Shorty, the word on the street was that the murder was the work of Watts. Pause. For those that don't already know, according to these YouTube streets, Kamain Fears was killed by Chicago's John Wick / FYBJ Maine's homie, Tay Savage, but there's no evidence of this, other than the fact that they belong to rival gangs, both located on the low end. And, for those who have not watched our videos about the many lies told by Snitches News, Chewbacca, about the war between the new town beaties and the hobos, let me keep it simple. He takes a real story, and then inserts himself into it as the hero. According to court documents, Wilbert Moore, better known as Big Shorty, was killed by the infamous super gang known as the Hobos. The Hobos killed Big Shorty because they had information that he was an informant, who revealed the location of one of their trap houses, leading to a police raid and criminal charges. So, how did the Hobos know that Big Shorty was a snitch?
Watts was like the hobos, he was like the hobo savior. Like if you get into it with the hobo, anybody into it, he dropping addresses, he robbing people with them, like he's setting up, like he telling them what people at, pulling people over, unarming them, and then they come and rob you. Like he was doing shit like that. So I'm walking out my father's house one day, and the man pulled up on me. I had hit a lick though. I had robbed somebody who was with the hobos. And the man told me, hey look, you can get them their money back, or you going to jail. You're going to have a better problem. You're going to put some shit on me. You know what I'm talking about? Then I had problems with him ever since then.
Spalding and Echeverria, expected to be at the FBI for 6 months, but the investigation moved painfully slowly. Sometimes, this was due to circumstances beyond their control. In one instance, Watts had an accident, and went on medical leave, but mostly the slow pace of the investigation was dictated by the FBI. For example, Bernard Brown, then in prison, had been prepared to give a statement for more than a year, before Smith told them to bring him in. When Smith finally interviewed him on August 7, 2009, Brown described in detail the structure of Watts's extortion operation. Smith showed him a photo array. He recognized several officers in Watts's crew, including one whom he said once proposed giving someone a pass on 60 bags of dope, in exchange for an AK-47. While the FBI had resources not readily available to the CPD, high-tech surveillance tools, funds to pay informants and use as bait and stings, Operation Brass Tacks was built, according to Spalding, on the foundation of the street informants she and Echeverria had developed over the years. Before they were detailed to the FBI, while they were in the narcotics division, they had gone looking for Snitches News, Chewbacca, to see what he knew about Watts and his team. Although they had worked with him for years, they had never had occasion to talk with him about Watts. They had always been focused on the particular case they were developing at the time. They couldn't find Snitches News, I did it again, Chewbacca, at any of his usual haunts. It turned out he was in prison. He later told them that Watts had put a case on him. At one of the Wells buildings, Watts had approached him and pressed him for information about where some drugs were stashed. In the past, Chewbacca had cooperated with Watts, but this time he simply didn't know where the drugs were. When he wasn't forthcoming, Watts put someone else's package on him. Knowing he wouldn't be believed over Watts, he pleaded guilty. Chewbacca was often in and out of jail, on relatively lightweight charges, such as drinking in public, but the drug conviction resulted in a 2-year sentence. After they began working with the FBI, Spalding and Echeverria finally spotted Snitches News, I keep making the same mistake, Chewbacca, looking for food in a dumpster, outside a White Castle at 35th and King. He had recently been released. He climbed into the backseat of their car. After they exchanged greetings, and Chewbacca filled them in on his incarceration, they asked, "What's all this shit we've been hearing about, Watts?" Chewbacca started talking, and it was a long time before he stopped. He was an avalanche of information, confirming the scope of the protection racket Watts was running. They asked him how many times he had seen Watts paid off by drug dealers. "Hundreds of times," Chewbacca replied. "For years. The boys call him Thirsty Bird. You have to pay taxes to sell dope. Watts ain't nothing nice. You come up missing if you go up against Watts. Look at Shorty. Look at K-Main." Chewbacca said he had witnessed a confrontation that Big Shorty had with Watts in front of one of the Wells buildings in the days before he was murdered. Watts was pressing Big Shorty for more money. "We don't eat like that anymore," Shorty told Watts. "I'm done. I'm going to the feds on your ass." A few days later, he was shot down. "Nobody lives to tell when they get into it with Watts," said Chewbacca. "Watts leaves no witnesses." On many occasions over the years, Chewbacca said he had seen Watts take drugs off one person and put them on another. He imitated Watts passing drugs from hand to hand, saying, "Who's going to ride the train today?" Growing up on South State Street, Chewbacca had known Watts before he joined the department. Watts was not he said, a cop who went bad. He was a dope dealer, who got the badge to further his criminal vocation. Angry about being falsely arrested, Chewbacca was prepared to work with Spaulding and Echeverria, including wearing a wire, to bring Watts down. Another one of their informants, a drug dealer at the Harold Keys homes on South State Street, had traveled a similar path. Like Chewbacca, he had his own reasons for working to bring Watts down. He was really good, said Spaulding. We could never get him. They had built a relationship with the man. He said, you were never gonna get me. But he helped us get everybody else. Watts came to the Keys dealer to get paid off, Spaulding recounted. There were drugs and guns on the table between them. You've got to give me more than you've got on the table, said Watts. The drug dealer misunderstood him. He thought Watts meant he wanted more drugs and guns, when he wanted more money than the value of what was on the table. If he had understood, according to Spaulding, he would have gone along. She quoted him as saying, if that motherfucker told me I needed to give him another $5,000, I would have given it to him. As a result of this communications glitch, Watts put someone else's package on him, and arrested him. He did 2 years, and was particularly upset to have missed the birth of his son. When he came out of prison in the fall of 2009, he had a beef with Watts, and was prepared to work with Spaulding and Echeverria as a CI, a confidential informant. They developed a sting, in which both he and Chewbacca played roles. In February 2010, Chewbacca ran into Watts, and described his role as a drug courier. Nobody suspects me, he told Watts. I walk dope and money up and down State Street all the time. I'm invisible. The plan, according to Spaulding, was for Chewbacca, outfitted with a pen and baseball cap, rigged with audio and visual surveillance devices, to go from 22nd and Michigan to a parking lot at 26th and State, where he would deliver a bag to their CI from Keys, who would be parked in a covert FBI vehicle. Watts isn't going to take the bait, Spaulding told the FBI agents. She predicted he would observe Chewbacca's courier routine first. I know him, she said. He's careful and calculating. That's why he's still on the street. The scenario played out as she predicted. Watts and his partner, Khalid Muhammad, observed the operation but didn't pounce. Hey, buddy, that was smooth, Watts told Chewbacca later. That was so smooth. Having hooked Watts, they orchestrated a sting on March 31, 2010, to reel him in. An agent gave Chewbacca the bag containing the money. Another agent was to follow Chewbacca to witness the transaction, so he wouldn't have to testify in court. Do you have eyes on the CI? Spaulding asked over the phone. I'm not going to be daisy-chained to his ass, the agent replied. I'm going to lunch. In the end, the agent didn't see the transaction. Nor did Smith, who was observing from a nearby hotel room. He explained to Spaulding that he had to go to the bathroom. Watts, who was off duty, showed up in his police uniform driving an official vehicle. Muhammad was with him. Chewbacca also observed another member of the team, Al Jones, in the course of the sting. Watts intercepted Chewbacca, and took the bag. When he looked inside, he became agitated. It's empty. Oh, here it is. Under clothes and other stuff, he found $5,000. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, Watts told Chewbacca. We're going to have to arrest you for your own good. I'll send in my guys to bail you out. In all likelihood, Spaulding speculated, he would have dispatched other off-duty members of the team to bail out Chewbacca, with some of the money they had just ripped off. Chewbacca was holding a 7-Eleven coffee mug that was wired. While being handcuffed, he managed to hold on to the mug. He protested fiercely that he didn't want to go to jail. He ultimately prevailed. Watts gave Chewbacca $770 and released him. The two officers then drove to Muhammad's house, where they presumably divided up the spoils. Spaulding and Echeverria were unnerved. FBI agents had repeatedly expressed suspicions that the CPD was subverting the investigation. Now, in light of the botched sting in which one FBI agent broke contact with the CI, and the other took a bathroom break at a critical moment, they wondered, was the FBI really this inept, or was something else going on?
Okay, so in 2008, that's when your mom ended up getting locked up.
Yeah, I got arrested. I got arrested too. I got arrested before my mom got locked up. Like, I was over there in the extension buildings with Brick, FBG Brick. Me and Brick was right to the building. Watching them come up there, and he come in there. He say, man, you got something for me? I say, I ain't got nothing for you. He say, you going to jail then. And then after that, I reported to the feds again. This motherfucker harassing me. And then that's when my mama went to jail. And then he ended up going to jail down the line. Later on, though. But, yeah.
2 years after the murder of K. Main Fears, purveyor of the Obama dope line, Spaulding and Echeverria made a major advance in the investigation. The homicide remained unsolved, and under the pretext of investigating the case, they reached out to those who had been close to Fears. By pretending to be interested only in the murder, they hoped to make it easier for those they interviewed to talk freely about the operation of the drug trade, and thereby gather intelligence about Watts's criminal enterprise. The strategy worked. Over time, they developed a relationship with Fears's former girlfriend. Fears had been shot outside her home, on the 3700 block of Calumet. She was a nursing student at Kennedy King College. Spaulding described her as well-spoken, no attitude, she had made good choices. Then, she met K-Main Fears. By the time she realized who he was, she was in love, and pregnant. The young woman, who could not be reached for comment, became a major source for Spaulding and Echeverria. She gave them valuable information about the drug trade. She told them where the Obama dope line stash houses were, and described the internal workings of the operation. She had been with K-Main dozens of times when he paid off Watts, said Spaulding. One day, she was walking a few steps behind Fears and Watts, when Watts patted Fears's pockets. "Easter's coming up," he said. "Where's my money? My kids need Easter baskets." As the demolitions progressed at Ida B. Wells, Fears moved his operation to 37th and Indiana. Watts came around, seeking to tax him, as he had at Wells and Ickes. Fears refused now that the high rises were down, and threatened to give Watts up to the feds. A few days later, he was killed. Early that morning, Fears and his girlfriend were lying in bed together. He got a call on his phone. "I've got to go handle this," he told her. He went outside. She heard gunfire. She looked out the window, and saw a hooded figure leaving the scene. The man turned and looked up at the window. She was afraid he saw her. Knowing how Fears operated, she said, no one could get close to him unless he knew them. The shooter or shooters took 2 cell phones off his body, so it couldn't be determined who had made the call that set him up, and retrieved all the shell casings. Having built their relationship with Fears's girlfriend on the pretext they were working the homicide, Spaulding and Echeverria had, in fact, with her help, developed significant new information about the murder. So, they took her to the cold case unit, in the hope detectives there would pursue the leads they had generated. The sergeant they dealt with was not welcoming. Spaulding and Echeverria were not in the room when the sergeant interviewed Fears's girlfriend. After they emerged, the sergeant asked the woman, gesturing toward Spaulding and Echeverria, "What did those two do, that my guys couldn't do in 2 years?" "It's very simple," she replied. "They did something none of your officers did. They knocked on my door, and asked me." During this period, Spaulding and Echeverria also talked with K-Main's mother, and his brother Jerome, aka Monk, who had assumed leadership of the Obama drug operation. The relationships they developed were such that, when the mother died, the family invited them to the wake. One day, as they drove past 37th and Indiana, Monk flagged them down. He leaned in Echeverria's window, and the three talked for about 45 minutes. Moments after they parted, Spaulding received a call from a DEA agent she knew. They set up a meeting in a nearby alley. "How do you know Monk?" the agent asked. "We're trying to get a wire up on him. We just saw him flag you down, and talk with you." With a touch of undisguised pride, at least in the retelling, she asked, "Do you want his cell phone number?" She made a phone call. "Hey, Monk," she said, "I just wanted to make sure this is still your number. Thanks." When Watts's name came up in the course of the conversation, she recalled, the DEA agent was outraged to learn he was still on the force, and had been promoted to sergeant. "Watts is still around, as corrupt as he is? We were looking into him 10 years ago. I can't believe your fucking department. I can't believe they didn't do anything about it." By the summer of 2010, Spaulding and Echeverria had, in effect, been orphaned by both agencies involved in the joint investigation. On the FBI side, the behavior of Special Agent Patrick Smith had become increasingly erratic. It turned out, he had never done the paperwork necessary to properly establish them at the FBI, and they lost access to the office and car they had been using. On the CPD side, Tina Scahill, the Chief of Internal Affairs, who had assigned them to Operation Brass Tacks, had been moved to another command position. They lost their key protector. "Fast forward," said Spaulding. "I believe if Scahill had stayed in place, none of what happened would have happened. She would have protected us." Scahill was replaced by Chief Juan Rivera. Well liked within the department, as one high-ranking official put it to me, the rank and file know he cares about cops. Rivera had a long-standing relationship to the Watts investigation. He had been a sergeant in internal affairs when it was initiated. Now, years later, he was back as chief, and the case, still open, was once again his responsibility. Looking back, Spaulding now believes the investigation was designed to fail. Watts was known to be at the center of a far-flung criminal enterprise, with multiple co-conspirators. Yet, the investigation was reduced to 2 cops, 1 car, 1 radio, and good luck. Nonetheless, the 2 undercover officers continued to work the case as best they could. Then, the bottom fell out. The first sign that something was wrong came in August 2010, when they submitted paperwork to Commander James O'Grady of the Narcotics Division, seeking approval of their Ickes informant, as a CI. Word came back from a sergeant they dealt with, in narcotics that O'Grady had refused to approve the application, and had instructed him, "You are not to work with those, IAD, rats." Realizing their cover had been blown, Spaulding and Echeverria immediately sought out Rivera. He told them he had informed Deputy Superintendent Ernie Brown that they were working on the Watts investigation. Brown, said Rivera, must have told everyone. Today, Spaulding recalls this as the instant when everything changed. She immediately grasped the implications. "I knew I was doomed." She remembers every detail. The smell of coffee brewing in the IAD office. The perspiration soaking her shirt. The sensation of free fall. "What the fuck did you do that for?" she challenged Rivera. "I thought it would be helpful for you," he said. "What do you mean?" she shot back. "Telling someone who's friends with Watts?" "I think I might have fucked up," said Rivera. "My life is in this man's hands," she recalls thinking, "and he is telling me he fucked up." They were, she knew, utterly exposed. "You guys are in grave danger," Rivera said, "and I can't protect you. So for now, you have to be extremely careful. Fly completely under the radar." Rivera described a meeting of bosses at which O'Grady referred to them as rats, and Nick Rohde, the chief of the Organized Crime Bureau, said he wouldn't allow them to work in any unit under him. Although O'Grady was their commander, they had never met him. "He wouldn't know us if he saw us on the street," Spaulding said. Yet he was, according to Rivera, ordering officers under his command to retaliate against them. "God help them, if they ever need help on the street," Rivera quoted their commander as saying. "It ain't coming." O'Grady and Rohde deny making the utterances Spaulding alleges. Their denials are sweeping and categorical. In statements in the whistleblower case, each made the same sworn declaration. "I never made any statements to or about plaintiffs, or took any action against, or relating to plaintiffs, based on any reports they may have made to the FBI, of alleged criminal misconduct or corruption by Watts, Muhammad, or any other Chicago police officer." The Chicago Police Department and the FBI both declined to comment. All the law enforcement officers who are named in this article either declined to comment, or did not respond to requests for comment. Rivera, in his deposition, denied talking with Ernie Brown about the involvement of Spaulding and Echeverria in Operation Brass Tacks. He denied ever talking with O'Grady about the 2 officers. He denied playing any role in outing them. And he denied that the conversation Spaulding describes with great emotion as a pivotal traumatic experience, the moment she realized how exposed they were, ever took place. At the same time, Rivera acknowledged that he had numerous conversations with Spaulding and Echeverria, and they talked almost every other day. Despite his sensitive position, he was, according to Spaulding, an expansive talker. It seemed to give him pleasure to instruct her and Echeverria about how things really worked within the department. Rivera, Spaulding said, told us stories about everybody. If you're enjoying our feature presentation, Worst Places to Live, Ida B. Wells, Code of Silence, please put some pressure on that like button, and subscribe to the Cartoon News Network, so you won't miss the exciting conclusion of this story in our next video.
Watts was like the hobos, he was like the hobo savior. Like if you get into it with the hobo, anybody into it, he dropping addresses, he robbing people with them, like he setting up, like he telling them what people at, pulling people over, unarming them, and then they come and rob you. Like he was doing shit like that. So I'm walking out my father's house one day, and the man pulled up on me,